There's no other way to say it. CTV is actually really panicking. In fact, the mainstream media in general is very much panicking because as much as they try to say that Alberta won't be separating or they're trying to call Danielle Smith's bluff, it's ultimately not up to Danielle Smith. It's up to the people, and the people have spoken. They are not happy. Albertans are not happy with the current Liberal government, with the previous Liberal government, and the direction that any Liberal government is taking this country, because Alberta is getting screwed over on all the different fronts. Specifically, equalization payments. Alberta is making so much money for this country, but they're not keeping it. It's all going to other provinces, and that is a fair take. That alone is enough to piss anybody off. Whatever tax bracket you're in, 15 or 25% or 45, 50%, however taxes really vary in Canada. Imagine if you were now taxed at 90%. Would you still kind of want to go to work, or would you say, what's the point? What's the point? And so that feeling right there is kind of how Albertans, if I can speak on behalf of Albertans, since I'm not one of you, that's how Albertans really feel, that money shouldn't be gone out of the province vis-a-vis the equalization payments, not to that extent, if at all. And so that alone is really starting to open up a lot of eyes in the country, but specifically in Alberta, that there's a better deal out there. And if Albertans don't get that better deal, they're going to freaking separate. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do want to encourage you all to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It does really help grow the channel. We're taking another look at Alberta separation because it doesn't just seem like a myth or a fairy tale. It genuinely feels like it's going to happen. And before we actually get into the video, I want to pass the question off to you. Do you think that it's going to happen? Maybe you're an Albertan, maybe you live in Ontario, maybe you live abroad. Do you think, or do you support the idea of Alberta separating? Let me know down below with a yes or a no. Without further ado, we're taking a look at the CBC panel, because the bald guy from CBC is trying to orchestrate through his Power and Politics panel, and it's not good. They do realize Albertans are pissed, but they seem in total denial that it's a real thing. So let's get into it.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith announced last week changes to make it much easier for citizens to trigger a referendum. And both Smith and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe say they oppose separation, but they also won't stand in the way of citizens forcing a vote on it.
There is a large and growing number of Albertans that have lost hope in Alberta having a free and prosperous future as a part of Canada.
We just want to be treated fairly in Confederation.
We need to unite this country, show some love to the people of Alberta and Saskatchewan.
The idea of separating here is a non-starter, and that doesn't take anything away from our reasonable demands that the federal government ensure we have access to the same level of funding, the same opportunities that Quebec and Ontario get.
Build up the Canadian economy, build up the Canadian worker. I think that's how we can make sure that every region of the country feels like they're invested.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is doing his best to extend an early olive branch. The Prime Minister says he'll meet with premiers in person next month in Saskatchewan. In the meantime, Carney is discouraging any referendum on separation.
Canada is stronger when we work together. As an Albertan, I firmly believe that. You can always ask a question, but I know what I would respond clearly.
You know, Andrew, we use the shorthand Western separatism. We're really talking about Alberta and Saskatchewan. That's where these movements seem to have what life there is to it. How serious do you think this is right now? I mean, I know Danielle Smith lowered the bar for the amount of signatures required to get it there and says she'll facilitate it if it's what people want. How worried should people be?
You know, they should take the underlying message about a lack of fairness more seriously. And I don't think that people really in the rest of the country understand why a lot of Western Canadians, especially those in the prairies, in the oil sector, in the mining sector, in farming, really feel kind of hard done by and passed over. And whether that's the fact that this government, whichever party to be honest is in, seems to have a hierarchy of workers that they're prepared to protect that doesn't reflect, the potash miners in Saskatchewan, the canola farmers in Saskatchewan, the oil workers in Alberta. I mean, they seem to really be prepared to let them suffer pain while at a moment's notice, they'll step in to protect supply management in Quebec or the auto sector in Ontario. So, I mean, there is a grievance there, but it is also being weaponized by Conservatives against Liberals. And I say that because you see that the moment, if a Conservative government had been elected, both Moe and Smith would have rolled over on this issue immediately. They did it when Harper was in. The Conservatives rolled over on this as soon as they had an opportunity to ignore it and say, well, nothing we can do, it just is what it is. And so what we end up with is this kind of perpetual political cycle where the Conservatives use this, to foment, another degree of rage against the Liberal government. It's destructive, it's counterproductive, it's not actually in the interests of Western Canada, and it's an unfortunate piece. But do I think that there's any kind of growing separatist movement? No. Are there a lot of disgruntled Westerners? Absolutely. And is there legitimacy to their grievances? Undoubtedly. But is that going to manifest itself in a separatist movement? I don't think it'll be any bigger than it has been at any point in the last 40 years.
Shachi, how do you see it? Because, you would think maybe there isn't, the 50 or 60% or whatever you need to get there, but you didn't think, the UK would leave the European Union until it did, and you just wonder once you start this, where could it potentially go? So what's your sense of how real this sort of sentiment is, in terms of volume, in terms of popular support?
Well, and I'm sitting here in Calgary today, of all places, where so much of it is, driven by, as Andrew's pointed out, the sense of lack of parity, right? So you've got, we spend a lot of time talking about the lost Liberal decade. For many people in this province, in this city, in other parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan, particularly rural Alberta and Saskatchewan, they feel like it has been a decade of lost opportunities around resource development. And so having had 9 years, almost 9 years of a prime minister who was very much firmly in the leave it in the ground camp, they're going to be looking very hard to Mark Carney for signals when he talks about economic prosperity, when he talks about economic growth. What does that really look like? And, what does that mean around navigating a way around an emissions cap or around Bill C-69? And these are some of the demands, obviously, that we've heard from Danielle Smith. So when you look at, but there's also a really important element to bring to light here, which is the extent to which this is very much provincial politics at play. Danielle Smith has to deal with what it's the United Conservative Party. Well, how do you keep a united Conservative Party united when you've got, urban Conservatives who have had that sense of grievance around the primacy of Central Canada and the political clout of Central Canada that seems to have gone on for as many generations as any of us can remember, but at the same time do not think that it's an intelligent or a particularly strategic thing to do to leave the country. She's trying to keep that coalition together. I don't necessarily agree with the approach here, but that's it. This is very much driven by Alberta political pressures. Same thing for Scott Moe. When he fought re-election in 2024, there were questions about whether fringe parties, there's independent parties in Saskatchewan, all sorts of small, also-ran parties, peeling off 1% or 2% from Saskatchewan. Now, they won by a big enough margin that it didn't matter, but it's always a matter of not wanting to see that segment of the vote base abandon the Conservatives, go somewhere else. And so, they're playing local politics as well and trying to play to the fact that many of these people who are pro-separation would actually have, what they say, I'd change my mind about this had the Conservatives won federally. Right. And you're dealing with demographically a lot of the same folks. Rural males, right-leaning, who are unhappy about what's played out in the last election.
To add to that last point, I think a lot of us are unhappy with what just happened in the last election. And a lot of us, not just male right-wingers, but people of all shapes and sizes and varying political political beliefs or just in general, their values, male, female, old, young, are unhappy with what has happened, with what's happened for the past 10 years with Trudeau and what just happened with Carney's win and the direction that Mark Carney, Prime Minister Carney, wants to take this country, specifically Alberta's deal. Alberta should not be penalized the way that They have been. And this is me as an outsider viewing the situation going, yeah, that's kind of crazy. It's a very abusive situation, and people are not really falling for the Stockholm syndrome type of behavior. And that's why this movement, the referendum movement, is starting in Alberta. But it's almost like the Freedom Convoy, not to tie the convoy to Alberta or Albertans, but just the concept of the Freedom Convoy happening in this country and the trickle effect it happened around the world. You saw Freedom Convoy in America, in Europe, in Germany, in France, and Italy. It happened everywhere around the world. I think even Australia, New Zealand, like, it was huge. And so if we just remove the other countries, and instead of it being other countries, we look at the provinces, Alberta's separation is now in full effect, but it's also having a ripple effect to other provinces going, yeah, we're not really getting that good of a deal, such as Saskatchewan, which we're not going to be taking a look at in this video, but Saskatchewan is getting completely screwed over with all the tariffs from China and the deals on our farmers, right? And the deals that Saskatchewan has with exports and imports, and it's just not good. And then British Columbia, it seems to be that there's a grassroots movement here as well for people to want to separate. Now, whether that will be successful or not, it all kind of hinges on Alberta. So if it's successful in Alberta, it will likely be successful in other provinces.
The message to the Prime Minister is, you've won, but please now govern as if you'd lost. And here is our list of demands. But you know, Mark Carney, as a guy who grew up in Edmonton, says he wants to at least solve some of these grievances. So how would you recommend that he deal with this? Because it seems pretty clear he wants to focus on resetting the Canada-U.S. relationship, not inflaming the Ottawa-Alberta-Saskatchewan relationship.
Yeah, and so he's dealing with, a multitude of issues at the same time. And you can see his signaling. He notes in the press conference that you just showed that, he is an Albertan. He's talked about going out to Saskatchewan. I think it's as early as next week to meet in person with leaders. So he's definitely signaling, and the interprovincial trade barriers and making sure that they come down as soon as possible, which has been a mandate since, his first term as prime minister in the first 9 days, I think is also a key note, a key signal that he's prepared to do what it takes in order to address some of those grievances. But at the same time, there's a bigger fish to fry, and that's how are we dealing with these impending unpredictable trade negotiations with Trump, and the necessity of looking like a united front versus a fractured country as we head into those negotiations. And that's why Smith is dealing with so much criticism from other provincial leaders like Ford, who has taken on some of that mandate, Blanchette for other reasons, from First Nations chiefs that we saw yesterday in their United Press Conference, obviously from the opposition party, from Albertans themselves, who, doesn't look like they're polling anywhere close to a majority on this issue. So while I agree that there are some provincial pressures there, she was not elected on a mandate of separation. And you have to wonder how some of this rhetoric, I think the First Nations chiefs yesterday called it rhetoric of insanity around separation, is going, how she's going to deal with that dogging her. Like, she sort of put it out. She said, this is up to the citizens. If they get enough, signatures on a petition, I'll run with a referendum. But this is squarely tied to her, and how she deals with that politically. If most Albertans see themselves as Canadians first, I think it's a big political problem for her.
So James, how do you approach it as the Prime Minister? Because some of the demands that Daniel Smith made, I think it was Monday of this week, a guaranteed access to ports in the northeast and the east and the west. The Prime Minister can't deliver that, right? They can't force access through Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec to get to New Brunswick. And the demand on equalization is essentially either give Alberta more money or cut what you give to Quebec and these things. I mean, these are politically difficult requests coming from the Premier of Alberta.
Hey, bald guy from CBC. I think that's the point. The way Danielle Smith positioned herself in that recent speech, the more I've thought about it, the more I realize, okay, so her as a premier, she's got to play the political game because she's a politician. That makes sense. Can she come out and say, I am fully on board with separation? She could. She absolutely could. Quebec has done it, right, several times. But she's also running in an election, I think, this year. So is that in her best interest? It may or may not be. That's maybe up to you to determine down in the comments. Maybe you're an Albertan. Maybe you see Danielle Smith through a different light or the same light. But the way that she put forward those demands, they are very difficult, like very, very difficult to achieve. And so I think that was the point. Come out and say, I don't think that we're going to separate, but here's our demands. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's just the subtlety of the demands being so up there. It's almost like how Trump does the anchoring thing. He says, okay, well, we're going to do this crazy thing up there, but we're going to settle for something down here. And if neither of that happens, then absolute chaos. And so maybe Danielle Smith learned something from her trip down to Mar-a-Lago where she met Trump and President Trump and Kevin O'Leary. I don't know. But I think that the subtlety of that messaging of saying, okay, well, right now, we're not potentially going to separate, but here's our very profitable demands for Alberta. Quite frankly, it's a good deal for Alberta, but whether it'll actually go through or not, that answer is going to determine on whether Alberta actually separates or not.
I think, however, the Prime Minister can show steps in the right direction. Perhaps the three most important words that were said in the election campaign, certainly to the ears of Albertans and a lot of Western Canadians, were three words that were said after all the ballots had been counted, when it was Prime Minister Carney said, "Build, baby, build." Those three words are going to echo through. Those three words are going to echo through the coming Parliament for a very long time, and people are going to want to see real action and real reality on that. And so I think there are things that the Prime Minister can do. And I think for a lot of people, when he said "build, baby, build," they weren't anticipating more money for the new Vancouver Art Gallery. They weren't anticipating new money, for the Alberta.
Do you not want the art gallery, James? Is that what? No, I'm just kidding. No, I know what you mean. We're talking infrastructure and energy. That's what people want when they hear that,
exactly,
right?
Right. So I think the Prime Minister can show a reasonable approach to these types of things. The debate over equalization has been around for a long time. It gets frankly overstated. It's a federal government program it's a complicated political dynamic and all that. But look, the Prime Minister can show an ability to listen and an ability to move forward and to get things done. And I think he will. And I think he recognizes his task. Look, if the election campaign had resulted in a fourth Justin Trudeau mandate, a third in a row where he had won the plurality of seats but lost the popular vote three times in a row, then I think you might see a different dynamic. What's missing from this movement, and I don't want to tempt fate here, but what's missing from the separatist movement from Alberta is a thoughtful, charismatic, persuasive, and credible leader. That has never been the case. Never has been one. And I don't see any amongst the current group of folks who I see popping up on social media and elsewhere. So that's missing. I think Albertans are frustrated, but the idea that they want to separate is I think a step way too far.
So Andrew, what would you recommend the Prime Minister try to deliver? I mean, he's kind of trying to deal with the Trump situation, and then in comes this statement that Smith did on Monday, following the move to lower the signature bar the week before. In terms of oxygen and political focus, it's the timing is bad if you're Mark Carney. So how do you think he approaches it?
Well, to a certain extent, but on the other hand, it also gives him a license to do exactly what he said he wanted to do, which is to build. Let's figure out how you get an east-west pipeline, at least to Sarnia, if not all the way to the East Coast. Let's figure out how you deal with some of these other grievances that are sitting there. I have to admit, I don't agree at all with what you or James have laid out around equalization. Newfoundland, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have been very clear that the unequal treatment of natural resources, renewable and unrenewable, is what the big issue is, and the lack of a 10-province standard. That's fixable. Now, I know James was at the table when they made the last set of changes that disadvantaged Alberta and Saskatchewan, but that doesn't mean we just sweep it under the table. I mean, these are pieces, this isn't, just set forever. These are issues that can be addressed and can be worked on, and that's, I think, what Mark Carney needs to do. His government ultimately will be successful if it proves it can get something done, because that was the challenge Justin Trudeau's government had. They said a lot of good stuff, or at least a lot of people thought it was good stuff, but they never seemed to be able to deliver on it. And then they got caught up in kind of there's rhetorical flourishes that they would get that bound them into very weird policy positions. Carney's got a clean slate to deal with that, and I think he's got a lot of goodwill with the premiers to be able to make that happen. So, this is the opportunity that he's got to do nation building, to bring the premiers with him.
Carney is positioning himself strategically with premiers that align with his liberal ideologies. So the East Coast premier, the chick, right? She's of course a liberal. She's like, yeah, we are getting along really great. Duh. Who didn't see that coming? Doug Ford. Well, it's kind of a bit of a shocker to some. Other people have seen it coming for a long time that he's a liberal in conservative clothing. That's a bit disappointing because obviously we wanted him to support and endorse Pierre Poilievre, given that he's a conservative and Pierre was the conservative guy, but that didn't work out. So he, Doug Ford, the fat pig with rabies mentality, you gotta say that, he's positioning himself to be more socially and now fiscally liberal in order to get the best deal for Ontario. But Alberta won't do that. Alberta won't become liberal and won't be subject to liberal strategies because that's just not in the best interest of Albertans. As an outsider looking into Alberta, I don't ever see Alberta flipping to liberal or caving to some outrageous liberal proposition because it's been that way for so long. And that's what's driving the movement right now. The referendum and separation movement is people are fed up with that. They want a good deal, a better deal that they've ever reached. And I can't blame Alberta, which is why you're seeing so much momentum around this referendum.
Yeah, look, and I take your point on the frustrations over the non-renewable renewable thing. I mean, I was covering politics in Newfoundland when Danny Williams felt Stephen Harper broke a promise on that, and that led to, you know, a bit of a blood feud down there. But the way I read the demand was essentially Danielle Smith is saying, stop subsidizing the big provinces and or give us the same you're giving them as a measure of fairness, right? And that's either give a couple of $1 billion to Alberta or take away a lot of billions of bucks from Quebec.
Yeah, and you know, and she's on about plastic straws and everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a long list of things that don't make any sense. I mean, her objective here is, you know, an agenda of chaos to make things look much more chaotic than they actually are within the Federation.
Okay, Shachi, a quick last word from you and we'll take a break.
Well, I think there's some creative things that the Prime Minister can do. Three things very quickly. First of all, you know, the symbolism of, oh, I'm meeting people in Saskatoon or, oh, I'm from Alberta. It's not enough. It's not going to cut it right now. It's actually got to be action. Let's look at what the Prime Minister is prepared to do around quick negotiations on substitution agreements so environmental impacts can be negotiated so that it reduces one more layer or one more level of government around big projects. It's been the case in British Columbia, I think, for the last 4 or 5 years. Why isn't that a model that we can extend, you know, to many provinces, not just the Western ones? Things like carbon capture. Okay, you're going to do an emissions cap. You're not going to lift that. We don't know that he's going to. I don't think he is. But if that's the case, well, then what are you doing to bury the stuff? If you don't want it emitted, then how else do we deal with carbon in order to do some of this oil and gas capacity building? By the way, that 2/3 of Canadians say that they want when we ask them, you know, is Canada doing enough? No, they say the country's not doing enough. It should be doing more. And then I think the other real red flag, you know, the red rag to a bull on this issue is, and Amanda, I adore you, but the messaging around, well, let's put the national interest of, you know, above everything else. These are issues that have been simmering for months, years, decades, generations. Pick your starting spot. But Carney has an opportunity right now to try and get some quick wins on these issues and signal that he intends to do more than just talk about it.
Okay, Amanda, quick last thought on that. Do you want to speak to the national interest, a point you're making there?
I'm so glad that she adores me. I adore you too. But I still think that the national interests need to trump singular issues. And I think that there is a lot that can be done, should be done, that Carney has signaled he will do. And I think that all of that is the hope of Canadians. But right now, Canadians have elected him on a mandate of dealing with these Trump negotiations first and foremost. And nothing says we're united and ready to negotiate than a province saying they want to separate.
Well,
so that
these things
is
aren't
it's a big
mutually
issue.
exclusive, though. Like if you're talking about bolstering the Canadian economy, if you're talking about ensuring that Canadian resources get to market globally in order to put Canada in a stronger position to come back and negotiate with Trump, saying, you know what, we're actually doing okay. We've got this stuff that's going to Japan. We've got that stuff that's going to Vietnam. We've got these natural resources that are going. So you know what? It all stands to build out the Canadian economy, which is a position, and that should be considered part of the national interest. Not, we just can't talk about this because, Trump might get mad.
Well, James, can you make the national interest argument from Ottawa in a moment like this? Because I'm not sure how receptive certain segments of Alberta would be to that. And there is this dynamic playing out now where Daniel Smith has said hands off our oil when it comes to dealing with the U.S. When it's the auto sector in Ontario that's really under direct verbal threat from the president. I mean, can you make a national interest argument to the population in a moment like this?
Yeah, this is the national interest, right? These are one and the same. I think it's Chachi's way of saying it, right? That these things do coincide. The number one job, I think I said this in the past, so sorry if I'm repeating myself. The number one job of the Prime Minister of the country is national unity. Before you pave an inch of highway, before you deliver a piece of mail, before you build a crown corporation, before you do anything, the number one job of the Prime Minister is to make sure this country stays united. And it's the unfinished task forever. By the way, if Pierre Poilievre had won the election campaign and he only had 10 seats in the province of Quebec and a handful of seats in Atlantic Canada, we'd be having this discussion about national unity, but in a very different context. This is a forever debate in Canada. You know, and we had that when Stephen Harper won in 2006 and 2008, and we didn't quite break into the big cities, and then we had the fight with big city mayors. You know, this is a big, large, complicated confederation of lots of disparate interests, and Albertans have been felt that they've been pushed to the outside, and not only just been pushed to the outside, but been made fun of, and then that Justin Trudeau for a decade got elected not by neglecting Alberta, but by attacking Alberta and attacking and belittling their industry. That's how they feel. You can dislike that argument, but it's how they feel, and that needs to be reconciled. We talk about reconciliation. A lot of reconciliation needs to happen in this country, and it's the Prime Minister's job to get on with it.
Right, and let's remember that what the response is to Trump, in some ways, exacerbates this. Trump's response in terms of the tariffs that he was saying would go on to the auto sector if we didn't ban Chinese EV investment. Go ahead and do that. What's the Chinese response? The Chinese response is immediately to respond to canola. Auto's response to that is, oh, well, that's unfortunate. Here are some social programs that will not fully compensate you, but at least will tide you over. No kind of sense that actually was an industry worth really standing up for. Instead, we've got this other response saying, you've got to sacrifice in the interest of the national good. Everyone has to. We've talked about this before, but that's part of what the messaging is that comes forward, which is why people get triggered when they hear Amanda say, well, it's got to be in the national interest.
So Andrew, just as someone who was in government in Saskatchewan, the fact that they're going to have a first minister's meeting face-to-face, in person, the second one this year, I think, for the most part, but in Saskatoon, it's Scott Moe hosting. I mean, what kind of messages does that send? A message of value to Saskatchewan, and what needs to sort of come out of that, do you think, for it to have some proof points behind it?
Well, I think it is a real message of confidence from Prime Minister Carney to be able to say, look, I'm going to go anywhere in this country that I think that we need to be coming together, and we're going to bring people together in Saskatoon. That's great. That's exactly what he should do. It shouldn't be treated as something other than somewhere that the Prime Minister should be welcome and should be able to do business. And there are a lot of people in Saskatchewan, and I really appreciate the work that Carla Beck, the NDP leader, has done there to say that these referenda thresholds are too low on a question of separatism. He needs to be out there saying that we can build common cause with those who actually have common sense.
The whole common sense piece, we've tried doing common sense with the Liberals for 10 plus years, and it's never been agreed upon. The Liberals are somehow not able to have common sense when they're in powers of position or just living their everyday life. Sorry to say, but it's the truth. And Alberta is fed up of getting the crap end of the stick. And again, to reiterate my ongoing point, I can't blame Albertans for feeling the way they do. And there is a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of eyes on what Alberta is doing, not just from Albertans, not just from neighboring provinces, but from the rest of the country, and also from people from other countries, because this is not something that happens very often. And if it ever were to be successful, the time is now. There's never been a bigger conservative movement in Canada, specifically in Alberta. It's just peak right now. Yeah, it could get higher as time goes on, but we're at the peak. And so if there's ever been a time for this to happen in history, it's right now. And on that note, I'm going to end the video, but I do want to pass the question off to you who've made it all the way to the end. Do you think that Alberta will separate? Do you think it will be successful? And to add on to that, do you think that other provinces will start to get as much momentum as Alberta? Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. As always, if you haven't yet already, I'd like to encourage you guys to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.